So, hello and welcome back for the round of the competitive Team League tournament of Flesh and Blood. This is your host Saxo, and we are playing our third game of the week against Team Invaders. This time we will have Giannis Kouris facing off Geoffrey Benawar. It's been so far we have played two games. The first round, Chain versus Stavro, where the Stavro managed to land this really important disruption turns during the third and fourth turn of the Chain player, making it so that he never managed to fully be able to change the tempo back to the aggression back the Stavro player, giving us the first loss of the week. After that, uh, Canaris managed to snatch a game with Viserai against Boltin, where he managed to put an immense pressure against the Bolton player, not giving him enough time to accumulate his so desired combo. Now it's the third game of the week. The Team Invaders team so far has shown us Boltin and Stavro, meaning that there are still potentially many good options left to take. Quick reminder, the rules of the tournament are as follows: that each team chooses 5 heroes where they are paired against 5 different heroes from the opponent team. So pretty much you play 5 games, each with a different hero and a different player, facing off against the same setup, and the team that wins most games wins the round. So the really important thing is that each hero can only be picked once, so some really big players during the latest constructed era like Prism, Stavro are most of the time the obvious pick, but forcing you to play 5 different heroes is not as easy as it sounds. So it's really interesting to see what kind of team or setup each team chooses to make. Still, we haven't seen any kind of rune blade, which we suppose it's one of the strongest classes to play right now with the latest edition of Everfest in Classic constructed, and we've already seen the Stavro player from Team Invaders. The players just loaded the deck. We are watching the side from Giannis Kouris' side, so we don't know yet what heroes he's planning on playing today. And also some pretty good players of the meta game like Prism haven't been shown from any team yet. So we expect to see a lot of really meta games yet. It's an There are many decks that could be like sleepers because of how diverse these team formation forces you to be. That decks like Boltin or Dorinthia that didn't have a great game against decks like Stavro or Prism. So we just have our revelation of the day, and speak of the devil, we do have a Viserai versus Stavro match on our hands. So despite forcing a bit of diversity right now, we have probably one of the hottest games between ourselves of the current constructed meta. Viserai getting all these so powerful cards from the latest set ever first, like Revel in Runeblood or Gloom Veil, making it so that it's so easy for the Viserai player to keep an immense pressure, making it so that all his 5 card hands to be so amazingly strong. And from the Stavros side, it's one of those decks where we've seen it's one of those decks where we've seen him to have a lot of builds actually, either to face decks like Prism with a lot of action points or Guardians or stuff like this, or to go to the pure defensive builds like we've seen players like Hamilton who won the latest major tournament. I don't recall exactly what was it, where we see slower builds. And also one of the strongest cards that holds glue to this deck is probably the Awaken, probably the most common build, the Awaken build. But it's interesting how many ways there are for Bravo to build right now, and it feels quite strong, even though it's one of the latest heroes that joined the constructed scene. His legend point accumulation has been really fast. So, quick moment to the setup. I hope everything is okay. So the players haven't rolled dice yet. We don't know who is going to start the games. So let's see. Okay, so it looks like I actually missed the dice, so we see who will start the first turn. It's interesting that what route every either Viserai or Stavro wants to take during this game, because we've seen like Viserai players going to the full OTK Sonata route, or going to the full aggressive route with cards like Maverick Skies in all colors, or a lot of effects that make the Stavro player want to force a block, like consuming Politician and such. And also the same thing with Stavro, where we've seen playing from a complete defensive build to the full aggression that we're most used to right now. The biggest player probably for Stavro in this game, it's exactly like the last game we've watched with Chain, where the whole game is around that if Stavro manages to find enough pressure and the key disruption card during the really important turns where Viserai wants to end the game, if he manages to find cards that apart from damage also have a disruption effect, it's what most of the time closes up a game or might lock the tempo on Stavro's side. So pretty typical from the Stavro player. We've seen one Arcane Barrier, Stalagmite, and we see pretty much he takes the first turn setting up a Channel Lake Frigid. Again, one of these cards where decks like Runeblades, who want to play a billion cards during their turn, it really slows down decks like this. And we noticed on the previous game with Viserai versus Boltin how much important it is to stop the Viserai player from playing so many cards. So we see the Viserai's turn opens with a Whisper of the Oracle, a card we've seen that That's one of the filler cards for the Viserai player most of the time, but you know, a blue 3 armor Guardian non-attack action card. Viserai loves to have access to cards like this. We see some opt action going on, but even that's the menace to the Viserai player that playing these cheap cards, getting forced to pay additional pitching with Channel Lake Frigid, is what makes these matchups so hard to play against. So we see the Viserai starting off with a pretty slow turn, Runeblood Incantation, again one of those cards that popped in ever first, and one of those cards that pushed the Viserai player to be able to accumulate a lot more rune chants a bit easier than other methods, and a pretty passive turn from Viserai, just playing a few non-attack action cards, making some rune chants, and setting up Arsenal, which is what makes sense when you have Channel Lake Frigid. So we see here Giannis Kouris with the Bravo to show off these so loved Star of the Show effect, showing 3 cards, and there it is, the first disruption. So what's so amazing with the Guardian, especially with the Star of the Show Bravo, is that if you do manage to combine your ability with a card that actually disrupts or that pays off with having dominate, like Crippling Crush, it can lead to devastating turns, and that's why what we see right here, seeing 13 dominate go again. It's amazing, and it's what the Viserai player really doesn't want to see, because the Viserai players really loves when decks like many decks really, when they are not able to fully utilize the 4 card hand they have in order to be aggressive. But Crippling Crush with Guardian is exactly what would really destroy Viserai's turns. Here we see just blocking with a Swarming Gloomveil, one of those premium cards of Viserai, taking a massive turn damage on just the first turn of the game, and discarding 2 cards, one of those being a Mordor-Tide, one of those really kick-off cards for the Viserai player. And here we see that Kouris prefers to keep his arsenal, discarding the Channel Lake because he didn't have enough ice speeds, having his pretty much fifth card of his hand with arsenal while having Crown of Seed is what really kicks the gas off, to gives enough gas for the Bravo player to keep pushing and keep having these 3 element cards that he so much needs to be able to keep up the pressure. So the Viserai player right now, with just 1 card in hand and 1 card in arsenal, knows that he cannot perform a pretty amazing turns. And also a quick reminder that the Crippling Crush discards are random, so he couldn't he couldn't have chosen the single card he might want to have in his hand. So what happens a lot of time, just like we saw here, is that the Viserai just passed his turn, ticking down his Runeblood Incantation and giving the turn back to Stavro, who chose to use Crown of Seeds in his opponent turn in order to potentially having the Stavro effect at the start of his turn, but it looks like that is not the case since he hasn't revealed anything. So right now we see the Virtual, Enlightened Strike, and Autumn stats, Red Autumn stats, swinging for 7. And even though this is supposed to be one of the weaker turns for the Stavro, still being able to press enough damage even in his weaker turns is what gives this deck so much immense pressure. But the Viserai player should be happy that this card is just dealing some damage, and potentially he can just take it and play his so wanted 4 card hand while still having no disruption and a pretty high life total. So we see 3 rinses from him, and he opens with Become the Arc Knight, one of those cards where It really takes some mastery to always know what card you really want to use. So here we see discarding a red meet and greet, potentially looting for a non-attack, and we see a red murder tried. Murder tide one being discarded means that there is just one left in his deck, and we see it being played. That's exactly why the Viserai player is able to build up so quickly with his rune sense, being able to fetch cards like Murder Tide and having these 5 card hands really kicks off. And we see the first Sonata Arcanics of the game, so it looks like this will be just a clean Sonata for 0, meaning he will reveal 3 cards and he just needs one attack where he managed to get. So it's one of those cards, Sonata Arcanics, that was a huge revelation back in the day when it first came around, and it felt such a good Viserai card because it's amazing how much versatility this card has while being be able to either pop off with Blood Sith Skeleton for a huge amount in order to get a bunch of cards with Go Again and make a massive turn, or just be used like a cantrip where just playing for 0, looting 3 cards, there is a pretty good chance where you will be able to just cycle through it while popping and proccing all the Viserai effects like creating a rune sense. And also here we see a read the runes, so a pretty defensive turn from the Viserai player, but that's exactly what the Viserai players love doing, setting up these huge turns while having accumulated this vast amount of rune sense. And that's one of the probably best archetypes to play against Stavro. So again we see Kouris proccing the Stavro effect while having a 5 card hand and showing an evergreen and 2 blue cards having the pitch. Let's see if he's able to combine it again with some kind of disruptions. That would be amazing, but even that, just proccing the Stavro effect with a red card and following it up with a hammer attack is what makes this deck so strong, because you just are on a clock. There are no decks right now that can consistently block against a 9 dominate Gen attack and another hammer attack for 4. And that's what makes this deck so strong and so consistent during this past construct season. So let's see, it looks like he chooses to attack with an evergreen and keep the pressure up. So these swings right now for 9 dominate and go again, which is one of the more typical turns. And we see a block with the red mid and grid. It looks like it was almost a forced cantrip, but it's one of those cards where the Viserai player doesn't really mind losing because there are so many cards with effects like this. So it looks like Kouris prefers to close the chain and play Winter's Bite in order to remove a card from Viserai's hand. That's so interesting because he really doesn't want to allow his opponent to play with a full card hand, because he knows that how fast these rune sense can be generated and how fast this game really can change its tide. Because again, Viserai again is one of those deck where sometimes, like most of the time, the life totals do not really matter as much, because it's a bit virtual. It's so easy for the Viserai player to swing a game and do a massive 30 damage turn while having a bunch of rune sense and Bloodseed Skeleton. And that's why that even though the life totals, it feels like Stavro right now has a massive life lead, that still it's so easy for these to go towards the other direction, because just a good turn with Sonata or a good turn with any card that allows you to fetch for more cards really can change the pace of the game really fast. So again, we see Viserai playing, keeping up with his more passive approach, which will be really interesting to see how the the Stavro player will respond. So we see right now that Kouris chose not to cycle with Crown of Seed and just attack with a blue Lightning Surge, potentially baiting some kind of equipment defense, or probably wanting to force a bit more damage before he lands his big attack. Right now he still has 4 cards in hand. That means that pretty much any attack is still viable to be hit by. So the Viserai player should be feeling weird right now, and 11 points of health is really close to that critical moment where pretty much the dominate attacks at some point will start to be lethal, and right now that's exactly what we. So it looks like it's an unfused Oceanoid right now, swinging for just a clean 7. So the Viserai player should be happy about that, seeing just an red Oceanoid being swinged with just a 7 without any disruption effect. He could potentially play something like Pamel, but it's not something that occurs a lot with Pamel is one of those cards where it's not the most common to be played on the Bravo deck. So it looks like the Viserai player will choose to block with Skullcap and Scaletta, choosing to keep his life total a bit high to not be so afraid of these huge dominate attacks. So it looks like we go back to the Viserai's turn. He creates another rune sand, and that's where the things start to get tricky. Right now the Viserai player has 4 cards in hand and 1 card in arsenal, and it's become the Arc Knight, discarding to looking for the card he hopes to. It looks like it's one of those turns where the Viserai player really wants to go off, and that's what we see right now, seeing him fetching for the Scaletta, for the Sonata Arcanix to push and maybe have one of those huge turns. So right now we see a Scaletta pop with a massive amount of 14 rune chants and Sonata Arcanix. That means that he will get to reveal 10 cards, looking for attacks and non-attacks, potentially getting the massive amount of 5 cards into his hand. And that's the point where, even though there was such a huge life difference, right now if he manages to hit a great Sonata, this game might be, almost over. So we see right now he doesn't have that much of an even split, but it's still too early. Reduce the rune chance, one of those cards where you really love having against Guardian, but when the time comes for the Sonata, it's one of those cards where it might really stop you. So right now we have 4 hits for 3 hits for the Sonata, and that's 3. That's a bit lower than expected, so he just gets 3 attack cards into his hand, pretty much recycling. But that's the thing, that even one of the weaker Sonatas playing a card that potentially deals 3 arcane damage and drawing 3 cards, it's just so valuable. And let's see what what kind of tricks the Viserai player will have, because right now also his next attack is definitely going to cost 0, because a quick reminder that Scaletta also reduces the cost of the next attack action for its rune chant, and having 15 rune chants means that every attack you play is free, and a 9th Blade of the Blood Oath is one of those amazing cards you really like seeing on these really swinging turns. So right now it's a casual 9 physical damage and a massive 15 arcane damage, and that's why the life totals so many times in this matchup are virtual, because right now these 37 life the Bravo player has are, I'm not say not true, but pretty much to non-existence, because he will either have to commit a lot of cards from his hand to be able to mitigate a lot of this damage, or potentially being able to threaten to get lethal. So the Viserai player right now should have, let's see, a quick. He still has 4 cards in his hand and 1 card in arsenal, meaning that the Viserai player is expecting to the Stavro player is expecting to get attacked at least 2 or 3 more times. So it looks like he chose to take all the 22 damage, getting instantly down to 13, and now the game goes to a way closer life total. And it looks like the Viserai player has almost the perfect follow-up, Rattlebones, one of those cards where if you have been dealt arcane damage, it can be played even though it was an instant, meaning he can get back his so valuable action point and potentially combining it with another strong go again card, meaning that he will still be able to play a bunch of cards from his hand. And that's again what we talked about, Swarming Gloomveil being this great glue that this deck has, where it's the perfect target for Rattlebones. It has go again, it swings for 4, its hit effect is not completely irrelevant. And we see a Rune Flash from Arsenal swinging for another 4 go again. Swinging for another 4 go again and having just 2 Rune Scents. That's another 6 damage, which is again not irrelevant. And the Viserai player still having 2 cards in hand and the Swarming Gloomveil in his banish zone, being able to play it whenever necessary. So it looks like that he's facing with a choice if he wants right now to block some of the arcane damage or really come down to the gear block. It looks like the Bravo player really wants to keep his hand. He really wants to be able to retaliate after this really strong turn from the Viserai player. And right now we are at this point where every life slip might be fatal. It's really interesting to see what route these players are going to take, and also because the Viserai still has a lot of hidden information. He still has 2 cards in hand, so the Stavro player might still get hit by something unexpected, apart from the 6 damage from the Rune Flash and another 5 potential from Gloomveil. And what he has to be sure about is another hit from the Rosetta Thorn for another 5 damage, 2 physical and 3 arcane. So that means that probably the Stavro player will have to commit one of his cards to block, or being paired with some gear blocks, or we see what kind of route the Stavro player will take. Right now, what the Viserai player should be really happy about is that he knows he has to force a block from the Stavro player, because the thing with the Viserai player is that any great accelerating card he might have in his deck, like Revel in Runeblood, or the typical one to punch with the Rosetta could be potentially lethal to the Bravo player. It's one of those turns where it's funny how fast the constructed games have been nowadays and how easy these first turns were, like Runesen's block or block attack, etc. And right now it's so important to see to not miss any point of life from either player. So right now the Viserai player still has managed to protect the armor from Grasp of the Arc Knight, meaning he still has that virtual 3 life total, which is amazing because it's a way for to block these really annoying dominates that the Stavro player is always able to bring to the table. And that's really sometimes the case where the Stavro player wants to close off a game. And from the Bravo side, he still has the full 2 points from Stalagmite and the full 2 armor for Crater Fist. And right now we see the action. We see using Crown of Seeds in order to prevent one of those damage and cycle the card from his arsenal, pitching a blue blink, one of those cards where it's really amazing when played aggressively, but having no armor is one of those perfect scenarios to get the virtual 3 life from it. So it looks like he chose to block the arcane and take the 3 damage, 4 damage, preventing one from the Crown of Seed, so getting his life total down to 10. So let's see the next attack from the Viserai player, right now swinging with a Swarming Gloomveil for another 4 plus 1 arcane. And it looks like he chose to block with 4 of his armor pins, meaning he will probably take the 1 arcane damage coming from the Runescent down to 9, forcing the Viserai to stop with the zero cost nonsense and forcing him to get a Frostbite, meaning he will have to pitch for his next action, which it looks like it will be a blue meet and greet swinging for 2, making it so that making these annoying effect that making it so that meet and greet has go again because he has been dealt so much arcane damage this turn, and potentially threatening an additional damage if meet and greet hits. But it looks like the Bravo player will respond by blocking with a break ground. And the finale of this stream or barrage of these attacks from the Viserai, Rosetta with the last pitch he has available, doing the final 5 damage, and looks like the Stavro player chose to take the damage, getting down to the 3 hit points, hoping to be able to retaliate. So pretty much this is it. The Viserai player has 0 runes left right now, but he's on a comfortable, a bit of a health lead, and still having retained some armor from his equipment. And it looks like the Bravo player will be managed to have this so important Bravo effect, showing 2 cards with no block and swinging for this massive 9 dominate go again break ground. So that's where it starts getting tricky, because probably the Viserai player will be able to take this hit if he wants without sacrificing any card from his hand, but that puts him to that really low life total where any dominate attack in the following turns will probably lead into him dying. And that's the case a lot of times with this matchup and how tricky it is. And he also knows that if he attempts to not burn any card, the threat from the Bravo player is still alive, attacking with the hammer, because he has already shown us 4 therefore go for... He has already shown us a blue ice card, meaning that he can pretty much easily follow up with his Winter's Whale for another 4 damage if the Viserai player chooses to not sacrifice any card in his hand. And also the thing is that right now Skullcap looks like won't be able to block any further damage, because it's pretty hard for the Viserai to get on a lower life total without being a bit scary of what might happen next. So right now the Viserai is facing the 9-go again, breakdown attack, while retaining his 4 cards in hand. And it's interesting to see what he do. It looks like he chose to block with a red Rune Flash, blocking these 3, taking the 6 down to just 2 life total, and that's where it starts getting scary. Wanting to retain his Skullcap and his Grasp, it looks like he doesn't want to sacrifice any other card. It looks like he will block the full 4 armor he's able to do in order to not get further choked down with these Frostbite tokens. Meaning that's it with the Arcanite Skullcap, but the Viserai loses a valuable tool, which is Spellbound Creepers. But when the game state goes to something like this, where it's not easy to keep a big card hand, so it's not easy to be able to use the Spellbound Creepers, and again that's why some of these equipment are so valuable, because they have all these different ways that they can be played. So it looks like it's back to the Viserai's turn, where he just got his passive Runescent from the Rune Building Incantation, playing a second Rune Building Incantation, and with the 2 following, attacking with a blue Thrill of Skull for one of those really good filler blue cards for the Viserai deck, which is a massive 5 and 1 arcane damage with just a blue card. And this is sometimes just amazing how strong and how consistent sometimes these attacks can be. And really this it's also a great investment in the future, hitting the second Rune Blood Incantation, and also a total of 6 knows that the Stavro player will have to commit a card from his hand if he doesn't want to destroy all of his equipment and go down to pretty much 1 hit point. So it looks like he chose to block 4 of those and pitching 1 of them in the tunic to stop the arcane damage, meaning just 1 point of damage will leak, getting down on 2 life total, which is way safer than having the 1 life total and 1 armor, because without having a card in arsenal, the Bravo player right now really does not have any way to block the 2 arcane from Rosetta, even though it's not as easy for the Viserai player to be able to hold these 1-2 punch turns. Right now it looks like we will see just a clean breakdown turn, swinging with 7. We've seen this again, the virtual Enlightened Strike for 7. And right now this poses that it will take at least 2 cards from the hand of the Viserai player, and that's something that the Bravo really wants to. He really doesn't want to allow the Viserai player to have this huge turn again with his 4 cards in hand, because with how many Runestones will be accumulated, it's easy to know that he will be able to do a massive turn back. And we see now sometimes in these cases the reduced runes and signs where blocking for 4 is really relevant, and that 1 life total might really make a difference. But still the Viserai player has just 2 cards in hand, but with the amazing investment he did doing a Swarming Gloomveil, an amazing card to attack, having created 2 runes and tokens. Right now he will attack with a 0-cost card with 4 arcane damage and 4 physical, making it so almost impossible for the Stavro player to not commit a lot of cards from his hand. So it's a really great draw from the Viserai side, attacking with the Swarming Gloom Veil, doing this massive 8 damage with just a single card, really. Meaning he's able to either set up Arsenal or keep attacking with another cheap card, potentially threatening lethal, but it's a lot of damage for the Stavro player, and that's a thing also where Starve the Show, Stavro really doesn't want to be in here. Just like some other decks like Viserai, Stavro really wants to be able to utilize all the cards in his hand to execute these really strong turns, these really amazing turns. So right now we see pitching a blue for Crown of Seeds, potentially blocking with the two floating some of the arcane damage. This will get him down to a single hit point, meaning that a potential attack from Rosetta is lethal, but at this point of the game, probably if the Viserai player manages to just activate a Rosetta, probably the game is over either way. Because we're at this point where the Viserai player, if he's able to execute a big hand turn, there is no way that the Stavro player is able to close to not be able to block fully the turn. And really, that's the thing with the Viserai this past few months, where the amount of pressure this deck is able to pull is just amazing. And it's amazing that he's able to go toe to toe with a deck like Stavro, where also the name of his game is to be as fast as possible and to be able to close the game as quickly as possible. So right now it looks like there is a lot of thinking the from the Bravo side. And just a single card in his hand with no rune sense from the Viserai player probably does not threaten a lot of damage apart from a clean Rosetta Thorn attack for just 2 physical damage, but even that 2 point of damage, if the Stavro player is not able to block efficiently this kind of attack that is heading towards him right now, it could be so annoying to get an extra card from his hand. And again, it's one of those things where the Stavro player, to have if he doesn't manage to have at least 3 cards in hand, there is no way for him to proc his ability efficiently. It looks like he will block with the Spinal Crush and a single card in his hand in order to prevent further attack. And it looks like the Viserai player chose not to give him any breathing air, forcing a second card from Stavros' hand, leaving him with just 2 cards in hand. And that's the point where the Viserai right now, if the Stavro player, who probably won't have any strong retaliation after this, he knows that the 3 card hand is really easy to execute the Rosetta attack and close up the game with and close up the game with the Stavro and close up the game because he doesn't have to Arcane Barrier. But it looks like that Kouris managed to sneak another red Autumn stats into his hand and swing with these annoying 7 damage, meaning that he forces again 2 cards from his hand. Yeah, hello there, Nakazuma. No, I don't think he could make a rune sand because he had a frostbite, meaning that in order to create a rune sand, he had to pay 3. So right now it looks like he will block a total of 6, taking these 1 point of damage, getting down to 1 hit point, meaning he again has 2 cards in hand in order to attempt to finish up the game. So right now it's one of those scenarios where a lot of Viserai deck lists are running Vexing Malice, so it could potentially be the one card that's unblockable right now from the Stavro player. And it looks like now it will be a much cleaner turn, attacking with these annoying type of damage, swinging 3 with the Gloom Veil and 1 from the Rune Sand he has floating, meaning again that the Bravo player will be forced to block with 2 cards from his hand and having potentially being attacked with a 3rd card from his hand with Rosetta. So it looks like he chose to pitch a blue card in order to stop this arcane damage and to block with a 3 armor card, a blue Winter's Grasp, fully blocking the attack. And again, it's the same thing with the Viserai player if he chooses to attack with Rosetta or set up an arsenal, but that's exactly what the Viserai player wants to do. He really wants to force a lot of cards out of Bravo's hand in order to force him to not be able to retaliate efficiently, in order to be able to execute his final Rosetta turn in order to close up the game. And right now that's exactly what we see. But right now the Viserai is at this point where having 0 armor left, just the 4 from a Winter's Wail is enough to block with 2 cards in hand. And right now we see blocking with the Rune Sand, virtually blocking with 2 cards in hand, but creating this one valuable Rune Sand that with a Runeblood Incantation taking up to 2, forcing probably a blue card out of the Stavros deck, making it so that he won't be able to block the arcane damage. And here we see one of those amazing cards from his hand, this Rattlebones, looking for the Gloom Veil, making 2 Rune Sands and leaving the 1 floating for the Rosetta, meaning that we will see an amazing big turn from the Viserai, probably blocking a lot of, taking a lot of cards from the Bravos player hand. And that's where it starts looking really messy from the Bravo side. He has to block 2 arcane damage, and that's the 2 card hand that almost always is able to proc the Rosetta Thorn, meaning that if the Bravo player doesn't have no, and GG is called because the Bravo player can see that even though he can fully block this turn, that the Rosetta Thorn that comes afterwards will be able to close up the game. And that's how Viserai loves to close his games. Pretty much we've seen games like this before. It's a typical matchup. It's a matchup where we've expected to see a lot in the current constructed metagame, and it's the same thing every time. If the Viserai manages to accumulate enough rune sands early on to hit this huge turn, forcing the Stavro on the defense position, making it so that he won't be able to do his thing. Bravo really does not like to play with 2 card hands and 3 card hands, but so that one, the Adventure Block LLC says that one turn he made 4 runes and Gloomveil, so that arcane be unblockable. If the Gloomveil has been fully blocked, no, it does not trigger, and at some point he attacked with Gloomveil and having created 2 runes and tokens, and later on the turn making the third or fourth. But if the Gloomveil doesn't hit, even though you have created 3 or more runes, its effect won't trigger, so he's still able to block the arcane damage. So that's the third game for FAB versus Team Invaders. We are now, after this game, losing to a 1-2, but both teams right now, it looks like they have shown the big cards. We've seen already Viserai from both sides and Bravo Star of the Sea from both sides, so the remaining 2 matches will be able to determine a victor. It was a pretty close game and something that we are really used to see. The Bravo player really didn't manage to hit these really aggressive, disruptive turns to lock the Viserai out of the game. But still, it was a great match and very well executed from both players. So, guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for staying here with us again. Again, we will try to stream and record all the games we are playing on the competitive tournament league. So if you like the content, hit a follow and leave a comment. Thank you for having you here. So see you again next time.